Honorable Lecturer of Language Assessment, Mrs. Meti, and my beloved friend. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya waddin wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'du. First of all, let us thank to Allah the Almighty who has given us mercy and blessing so we can attend today's presentations. And salawat and salam may be given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who the last messenger in this world. Good morning, everyone. How are you today? I hope all of you in the good conditions. Before that, I will introduce myself to you. My name is Fitriana Sri Rahayu with my students number 2021222032. Today, I will be the moderator for today's presentations. So, everyone, we are from Group 6. We will explain about who we are assessing, feedback, and motivations. But before we are going to the main material, I will introduce you to our group members. The first is Salma Ayu Belkis with her students number 2021222027, and then Raisa Janu Afifa with her students number 2021222029, and then also me, Fitriana Sri Rahayu, with students number 2021222032, and then Annisa Nur Islamiati with her students number 2021222038. Alright, the table of content for today's presentations is we will explain about the first one is how can knowing more about our students improve the quality of teaching and learning. The second is ongoing assessment, feedback on learning in progress. The third is assessment and students' motivations. Alright, the first material is about how can knowing more about our students improve the quality of teaching and learning, who will be delivered by me. The first material is about how can knowing more about our students improve the quality of teaching and learning. So here, as you can see on the screen, there are following questions about who our individual students are. The first is, what are my students' learning goals? You know, it is very important for educators or teachers to be able to determine students' learning goals first, so that later teacher will know the direction of students' interest in learning. The second is, what motivates their learning? An educator or teacher must also know what motivates their students. This is because of the most important of maintaining the stability of students' learning, which sometimes goes up and down. By knowing what motivates their learning, at least the teachers can increase and insert that motivations into the learning process. And then the third is, how can our feedback support their learning? Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to know how a teacher's feedback can support students' learning, because this aims to see how far the influence of the feedback given to students is, whether then it can support their learning or not. So the next slide is we will re-examine a number of assessment tools from the points of view of feedback by exploring the following questions. The first is, what is the feedback potential of a specific assessment tool? How does the feedback differ in relation to the assessment tool? The second question is, what is the potential impact on a student's learning in progress of a particular approach to assessment? The third questions is, how can we improve the quality of our feedback for our students? And the last questions is, how can we know when the assessment information is being used and understood by our students to improve their learning? So, based on that questions, according to Cheng 2013, we will examine the effects of assessment on students' motivations and self-regulation of learning. Ladies and gentlemen, as a teacher, we engage in assessment in our classroom every day. Our students know us, we know them. Assessment play an important role in our relationship with our students and their openness and willingness to learn. The next material is about ongoing assessment, feedback on learning in progress, who will be delivered by Raisa Janu Afifa. Raisa, please, time is yours.
Thank you to the moderator for giving me the opportunity to do presentation today. My name is Raisa Janu Afifa. With my students number is 2021220229. So for today occasion, I want to talk about the material. The title is Ongoing Assessment, Feedback on Learning in Progress. As you can see in the screen that the feedback teachers provide will influence students in ongoing assessment due to their future performance importantly. So as the teacher, we must give a feedback to the students, give the response to the student, whether the response is written or in the speaking form. Yeah, the feedback that we provide will fundamentally impact to the future performance of our students. And the second is the assessment tools we choose and the assessment practice we employ in while teaching a course will shape both the kind of feedback on learning that arises as a result and the information in generate in support of our teaching. So when we choose the tools or the media that will be used in the classroom, the first, it must be adjusted to the circumstances of the students, of our students, of course. Likewise, with the assessment, what will it use? It must be ensured that students can follow it correctly in order to provide maximum final result. Alright everyone, the next material is about feedback during a course. As you can see in the screen that Ferris 2003 suggests that there are few hard and fast rules as well as a little agreement as to the kind of feedback that will have the most influence on our individual students. Some researchers or some teachers argue that explicit feedback on errors in writing is essential. Other teachers might be reformulate about the sentence correctly for give the feedback. Uh, the problem of this happen because is that without an extra step, there is no way for a teachers to know if the explicit feedback and reformulation are actually supporting the students' learning. Here is two points that might be useful to give the feedback to our students. The first, students will learn the most and perform their best if they know in advance the evaluation criteria that will be applied in judging a performance. Jadi tentunya sangat benar bahwa jika siswa sudah mengetahui hal-hal apa saja ataupun kriteria apa saja yang akan dinilai oleh guru dalam tugasnya tersebut, maka si siswa itu pun akan berusaha semaksimal mungkin untuk meraih nilai yang lebih besar sehingga dia pun semakin termotivasi ketika mengerjakan sebuah tugas tersebut karena kriteria-kriteria tersebut telah diberikan atau telah diberitahu kepada siswa tersebut. The second point is about our feedback will also be improved if we share evaluation criteria with our students before their performance. Jadi, guru pun ketika siswa sudah diberitahu mengenai hal-hal ataupun kriteria-kriteria apa saja yang akan dinilai dalam tugasnya tersebut, maka guru tersebut pun akan memberikan feedback yang lebih meningkat tentunya yang dapat membangun siswa tersebut agar lebih meningkat lagi ketika dia mengerjakan tugas tersebut. Alright everyone, the last material from me, it is about teacher feedback, conflicting roles. Elbow 2003 argued that the problem with teacher feedback is that it simultaneously responds to two conflicting roles. So the first role is teacher as a coach, as formative and supportive information that will increase a student's future development. It is mean a teacher as a coach will give the supportive feedback that can help the student to do the task or do the activity in the class better in the future. The second role is teacher as a judge to explain to the student why they are receiving the mark they did. Maka ketika guru sebagai judge atau seorang penilai akan menjelaskan atau akan memberikan bukti terkait mengapa siswa tersebut mendapatkan nilai seperti itu. Misalnya, siswa tersebut mendapatkan nilai A. Lalu, jika guru sebagai judge atau seorang penilai, maka siswa tersebut akan diberi penjelasan oleh guru tersebut mengapa dia mendapatkan nilai A. Apakah karena dia sudah memberikan yang terbaik, beberapa kriteria-kriterianya sudah terpenuhi, maka dari itu siswa tersebut dapat nilai A. So, thank you for your attention. That's all that I can say. I give it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Raisa, for the great explanations. The next material is about assessment and students' motivations, who will be delivered by Salma Ayu Belkis. Salma, please, time is yours.
Alright, thank you for the opportunity. So in this moment, I will continue to explain you the material about assessment and students' motivation. Well everyone, assessment and motivation are directly related. This will relate to the teacher assessment practices such as what teachers assess and how they assess. That it have the greatest influence on how students learn, how students see themselves as learners, and how they see their learning. So I will explain you one by one of them. For the first one is that assessment practices affect how students learn. It means that when the assessment activities or assessment practices are good, that it will affect the students' learning process so that they will be encouraged to learn actively and enjoy it. The second one is it will affect how students see themselves as learners, which means that students will continue to learn by realizing that they are students. And the last, assessment practice affects how students see their learning. It means everyone, students can feel the process of learning. For example, in learning English speaking, they will realize or know that the students are lacking in fluency or accuracy. Or in presentations, students feel less in their performance or the other aspects. Alright everyone, additionally, in terms of classroom practices, teachers use both assessment for learning and assessment of learning. So this combination requires teachers to use both summative assessment or assessment of learning, that is involving the evaluation of learning with a mark or score, and formative assessment or assessment for learning, that is providing quality feedback. So, both practices have had a significant impact on students and both are needed in the classroom teaching. This is because positive assessment results can motivate students to take their studies seriously and continue to desire learn. Next everyone, to support students' learning and motivate them to learn, according to Chang and Fox, stated that there are three main aspects of assessment highlight the relationship between assessment and motivation. For the first one, assessment and motivation require high-quality feedback. This means that a good assessment that is linked to motivation must have better quality feedback. So the teacher should not give feedback without a reason. Therefore, everyone, feedback needs to be clear. It means that we as a teacher, when giving feedback, must be clear in showing where the students' mistakes were made and where students have to be improved. And then, feedback needs focused. It means we as teachers must focus on providing feedback to one aspect. For example, speaking. It is not allowed to teachers to give feedback to other aspects, like writing or reading. Next, applicable. It means that feedback must be useful and can be applied by students so that students can know which parts need to be improved. After that, feedback must be consistent. It means, everyone, that the feedback given by the teacher is the same to the first students and the other students. And the last one is timely, which means that the feedback is provided a reasonable amount of time. Alright everyone, the second, assessment and motivation, address individual students' need, allow for recognition of individual student differences, acknowledgement of students' unique prior knowledge and experience, increased use of self-assessment, encouragement of self-directedness, increased student self-reflections, and increased autonomy. For example, taking responsibility for learning, as well as setting goals for learning. The last is assessment and motivation engage students by making assessment real. For example, contextual to students. It means, everyone, that the teacher in making the assessment must be appropriate with the students, both the students' previous knowledge and the students' experiences. Then, by offering choices in assessment tasks, how the tools and how the procedures. Next is by supporting their connection with or belonging to a learning community, including them in assessment processes. And the last is by creating collaborative assessment practices where students see teachers as allies. Allies in here means that the students believe their teachers as people who can help them to achieve learning goals. Alright, everyone, we move on to assessment, learning, and self determination. So, the role of assessment in motivating students to learn can be traced to many theories of motivation. As Ryan and Desi 2000 identified four types of motivation, namely, the first is intrinsic motivation, the second self-determined extrinsic motivation, the third is non-self-determined extrinsic motivation, and the fourth is a motivation. So in here, I will explain you one by one of them. For the first one is intrinsic motivation. It refers to motivation that makes one feel engaged in an activity that is inherently interesting or enjoyable. So everyone, if the assessment practices teachers employ make a students feel learning is interesting and enjoyable, the students will be intrinsically motivated. And this is the types that teachers should have. While, in contrast, extrinsic motivation is motivation that is purely instrumental in nature. In other words, the activity serves as a means to an end, but the requirement to participate in the activity is imposed on the individual and may not even be something that they want to do. However, everyone, the second is self-determined extrinsic motivation. It exists when individuals participate in an activity voluntarily because they believe that the activity is valuable and important. For example, students realize that English lessons are important, so they think that they must get good grades because English is so important to continue their education to the next level. So it is extrinsic. Why? Because the reason for participation is not within the activity itself, but it is means to an end, and at the same time it is self-determined because the individual has experienced a sense of direction and purpose in acting. Furthermore, everyone, the third is non-self-determined extrinsic motivation. It occurs when individuals' behaviors are regulated by external factors such as rewards, constraints, and punishment. Finally, everyone, that is a motivation, which teachers should avoid this one. Why? Because it is the absence of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. It is a state in which an individual lacks the intention to act. In this case, students may feel that they have no control over their actions or that to act is meaningless or without a value or importance. When assessment fails to motivate students to learn either intrinsically or extrinsically, it is essentially a useless activity. So everyone, I think that's enough for me. Thank you for your attention. I give it to the next presenter.
Salma Ayu Belkis for the great explanations. The next material is about assessment motivation strategies, who will be delivered by Annisa Nur Islamiati. To Annisa, time is yours.
Next is assessment motivation strategies. An effective way in which teachers can motivate their students is by involving them in the process of assessment through various procedures. For example, the first one, teachers can involve students in setting learning outcomes or achievement goals. Although the main responsibility for creating these learning outcomes rests with the teacher and is usually guided by the curriculum and standards, communicating these goals to the students is one effective and practical way of enhancing achievement. Students can collaborate with the teacher to develop additional self-directed outcomes of learning. Next, the second is teachers can involve students in designing assessment criteria. Macmillan 2014 discusses the importance of creating learning targets, which involves teachers and students specifying what a student is to know or do as a result of instruction and the criteria for evaluating the performance. The process of creating The criteria needs to be a collaborative process among teachers and their students, as good quality assessment is team-based by nature. It can be carried out by using a checklist, an existing rating scale, or a rubric. Irrespective, such creation should be carried out by teachers with their students, so students understand the goals and learn how to achieve those goals as specified by the criteria. And the last, teachers can then choose various assessment tools to use. Knowing which tools to use in the classroom requires teachers to ask a number of questions. And here is the list. Here's the example of a number of questions. There are 4 types of questions, and we know that assessment has to support both teaching and learning in order for quality assessment to take place in instruction. Neither teachers nor students should be buried under assessment. At the same time, students are the key stakeholders in assessment. If students do not want to learn, do not how to learn, do not have the awareness or metacognitive strategies to learn, whatever teachers do is not going to support it. When students and teachers engage in conversations about assessments, uh, students are encouraged to consider their own learning and development, which aids in and supports the learning process. Motivation will continue if students witness and reflect on their growth in relation to learning goals. In addition, self-assessment plays an important role in increasing students' motivation to learn. Through self-assessments, students directly observe their own improvement and therefore they are more motivated to achieve. By involving them in the assessment processes, teachers encourage students to create a sense of internal responsibility for their achievement. And this process is sometimes referred to as assessment as learning. It helps students to personally monitor their learning processes by involving them in self-monitoring or self and peer assessment activities. It effectively supports their own learning. It is the use of a task or an activity to allow students the opportunity to use assessment to further their own learning. And self and peer assessments allow students to reflect on their own learning and identify areas of strengths and needs. And this tasks offer students the chance to set their own personal goals and advocate for their own learning. And here are 3 further assessment examples of how we can support student development. Number 1, teachers can share with their students the assessment criteria or created with them. Those are valuable for students to see teachers as allies in their learning. Teachers can then use the criteria as feedback for students on their performance and should initiate this process in small steps. It could help to bring all students learning in line, that is, sharing or understanding the same learning goals or destinations, even though the pathways to get there are unique and individual. Number 2, teachers can use student work as exemplars to illustrate levels of performance. This is best achieved through collaboration as teachers work together to build collection of student work over time. In addition, having teachers working together can ensure consistency of assessment. That is, teachers must reach agreement about what is good work and most importantly what such work looks like in terms of language use and the demonstration of knowledge or control of content. And the last, number 3, teachers can let their students take more responsibility for their own learning. That is, the use of assessment as learning. Teachers can demonstrate this through the use of self and peer assessment tasks. And then we can help our students by teaching them to be more analytic about their own learning, by giving them class time and a structure to examine their own work in relation to previously explained criteria, and by clarifying how they can improve their work. Maybe that's all I can say. I give it back to the moderator. Thank you.
The next is conclusions. The importance of the relationship between assessment and motivation in supporting students' learning has been increasingly examined in education. Teachers can exert influence on students' motivation through instructions, assessment, and feedback. Furthermore, the relationship of motivation and assessment is elaborated in two ways. One is through determinations theory. It's by Ryan and Daisy 2000, which categorizes four types of motivation that match well in the assessment context. The other one is through engaging students in assessment. For that reason, teachers need to get to know their students as much as possible and based on the information collected, try to assess students self-regulate their learning. I think that's all for today's presentations. Thank you very much for your nice attentions and then we apologize for all our mistakes. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And here the references that we use for today's presentations. Thank you.